size, and Alex Tuck seems to bring those two things together, Frank. And, you know, Alex, even though he was 21 when last year started, he still had that 6'4" frame. And you can't teach that. He's going to fill up. He's going to get even stronger. And I know that he spent a good amount of his summer improving in that aspect. And then it makes you wonder about some of those other guys where if you take a Colasar or a Brandstrom versus, say, a Suzuki, you know, he's not 6 feet. And maybe those guys you get to see, even if they've been productive at a certain level, how they eventually step into an NHL kind of role. If you're bigger, if you're Alex Tuck, 6'4", but if you're Suzuki, a little bit smaller, you know, not only in height but in size, these are situations in these rookie camps you guys were just talking about where you really can see that difference. Alex Tuck, not in the rookie camps anymore, right?
No. And I guess the biggest question surrounding Alex this year is where is he going to play and who's he going to play with? And we played the comments from George McPhee on Alex Tuck, thinking about him as a full-time top six, second-line player. And you tends to lead you to believe that he's going to be playing with Paul Stastny. How much better can Alex Tuck be with Paul Stastny as his center?
It's exciting to think about.
It's nice.
Yeah, because you've got some guys who could complement Stastny in a variety of ways. And hearing the early comments from Paul about the Knights roster. And, you know, he could have gone anywhere, right? I mean, there are a variety of factors that lead him to come to Vegas. But part of what he's talked about is the crop of young players that could re-energize him. I mean, he's, you know, on the wrong side of 30 years old now. He's 32 going on 33. But when you see someone like Alex Tuck, who's 10 years younger, there's a certain amount of excitement to rejuvenate someone. And not to say that Paul Stastny needs rejuvenation, but you come to a new city, you think about an exciting young player taking strides. And I think that as much as James Neal was a kind of a mentor to Alex Tuck, I think that someone like Paul Stastny can serve that role and maybe even enhance it more so because they will be complementary kinds of players. In other words, Stastny is a center, Tuck can be a finisher. You know, both Neal and Tuck were kind of finishers. It wasn't too often that Neal was setting up Tuck or Tuck was setting up Neal. I think Stastny to Tuck will be a pretty regular combination. You would think, you know, who knows? You know, I heard you talking with Ryan Carpenter on the show last week and how he fits in. You know, he said third line. Well, you know, there's going to be some competition for that third line. You know, where does Tatar fit in? There's so many good problems to have, and then we also don't know, could there be another move in the offing here before the season begins that could throw the whole thing up in the air and see where the chips fall. But for now, as the roster is currently constituted, yeah, Tuck and Stastny have to be a very likely combo. And then who's the third person on that line? Is it Tatar? Is it Eric Howla? I mean, Eric Howla had been a second-line center last year. You might have to put Howla on the wing this year. There's too many centermen. And, you know, Ryan Carpenter himself talked about having plenty of experience at the center position and how easy it is for a center to move to a wing rather than a wing to move to a center. That's the one thing that George McPhee has done in building that particular position. They thought it was going to be a weakness, right? That was a big critique for the Knights, right. Center position. Well, it's turned out to be one of their great strengths, starting with William Karlsson. We can't forget about him, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to try to touch on as many of those topics as we can there. And good voice, our friend Dan Duba joining us here. We asked George McPhee when we had him on about the second line and what it was and how they were going to replace Neal and Perron. And quite frankly, I was a little bit surprised at the honesty of his answer. But here's what George said about the second line last year.
Changed the second line from what it was last year because it wasn't, as second lines go, it wasn't good enough defensively to produce. But
10.
The goals against for 60 minutes was not good enough. We were actually dead last.
And there you have it, George McPhee talking about it. And we remember the big goals that James Neal scored, and we remember the assists that Perron had. But he was right out there and saying, look, I know all you guys were enamored with him, and I know there's a bunch of James Neal jerseys in the community and everything, and we like what he did too, and he was a big part of his team. But quite frankly, as far as 200-foot players go, they didn't get the job done, and we needed to improve that, and that's why they brought in a Stastny. And then if you put Tuck in there, and whether it's Tatar or Howla or whoever, they're expecting good production out of them, but they're expecting a better defensive effort. And I think that George McPhee and Gerard Gallant are looking for full 200-foot players, which maybe the second line wasn't the entire season last year.
Yeah, that second line had success when it could control the puck in the offensive zone. David Perron was so good at that. But if they weren't possessing the puck in the offensive zone, they weren't going to have a very successful shift. Whereas the Golden Knights' top line with Marchessault, Smith, and Karlsson, you would expect that if they didn't start in the offensive zone, that they would quickly get the puck from wherever they were into the offensive zone. That's what made them so good, and like the plus 49 for Karlsson and all the points, etc. But it was much more difficult for that second line to tilt the ice in the Golden Knights' favor. Obviously, Eric Haula is the leftover piece from that line. He has strength and speed in a way that David Perron didn't. James Neal had that great finishing touch. But there's not that same high energy level from Neal consistently that Eric Haula brings. I would imagine that having heard that comment from George McPhee, that Eric Haula will look to his new line mates and ensure that that isn't the case again this year. So whoever that turns out to be, like I said, it could end up with Haula on a wing. But when you talk about who's at center, who's on the wing, it kind of, when you have multiple centers on the same line, it's not that big of a deal. Just even the top line, sure, Karlsson was the center, but Marchessault took plenty of faceoffs, and that's the case up and down that lineup. So even if Eric Haula is the quote-unquote winger with, let's just suggest, Stastny and Tuck, doesn't mean Halla's not going to take faceoffs. Depends on a lefty-righty situation, defensive zone, offensive zone. And you start to think about the power play production, too, and where he might fit on the special teams. But, the possibilities right now for this lineup are exciting. That doesn't mean that the Golden Knights are done. Even though there are, in terms of numbers, they've got plenty of guys. But are they the right players? Is there a weakness? Is there the need for another forward someplace of a certain caliber? Is that defensive lineup, that core, even though Nick Holden has been added, we know that Shea Theodore hasn't completed his contract, though you'd expect it to be completed before too long. There are still some questions there, so I'm not ready to say that the lineup that you have today is the lineup you're going to see on October 4th.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because George McPhee talked a little bit about Tomas Tatar and kind of what kind of worked and what didn't work and why he might not have fit in right away with the Golden Knights. George McPhee was talking about what his expectations were of next season. We can get to that audio in just a second. But after hearing the audio, if Tomas Tatar is playing in a third-line role, is he going to be able to live up to what George McPhee had to say?
And let's hear that right now.
Will really play well for us next year once he gets comfortable. He had a tough year. He had shoulder surgery last summer, and it affected the summer, and affected his season.
10.
He wants to come back and be that 20 to 25 goal guy for us. So
I find that quote interesting because we're talking about, is it Tatar or is it Haula? Well, if you're going by what McPhee says there, Tatar's not going to score 25 goals if he's playing on the third line. So although George McPhee picks the players and Gerard Gallant decides where they play, it kind of sounds like George is expecting Tatar to be that third piece on that second line. Now again, it might not work out that way, but if you're going to put those expectations on Tatar, you got to give him the chance to achieve those goals. And I just don't see how that, as good as Tatar can be on the third line, it'd be shocking if Cody Eakin was assisting him on 25 goals.
Yeah, listen, remember how the lineup was looking at the beginning of last year. Cody Eakin was in that top line center role. He ends up as the third line center. You didn't know that Karlsson was going to play in that position. You didn't know where Eric Haula was going to play most of the year. So it's difficult to say now because so much is yet to play out. But we would often joke with Gerard Gallant about the so-called fourth line, right? Well, and we also hear about top six. Tatar is a top six, and if he's not in the top six, what is he really doing? Well, to me, it's more about who are his wingers, and if those, or his line mates, I should say, who's going to be with him as a center and a winger, and if the caliber of those players, the type of players are still high skill. It doesn't matter if it's the second or the third or the first. And really his production has to be on the power play. I mean, a good chunk of his production is going to come when the Golden Knights are a man up, and whether he's part of his line, his regular even strength line, as part of a power play unit, or if he's part of a different group, that remains to be seen, of course. Tatar can be that 20 to 25 goal guy. He could probably even do better than that. Time will tell, but as George mentions there, the health is a factor as well last season, and I think some of it between his ears, because you come to a new team to see what's been going on, first time leaving the Red Wings organization. He came up through the minor league system there. Golden Knights, very different than the Red Wings, so adjusting on the ice, off the ice, mentally, physically, I wouldn't be surprised if Tatar is closer to his career numbers in year 2 with the Knights.
And just kind of looking at those 4 players, however that's going to shape itself out, is there a combination that Dan Duva would like to call, maybe more than the others, maybe one that will take you out of your seat and produce some of those amazing goals that we saw last year?
Gee whiz. Well, I think that something about what Tomáš Nosek did at the end of the season, and knowing his roots in the Red Wings organization, I just mentioned Tatar from that organization. They're both from the same part of the world in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And also don't forget that Paul Stastny's roots are Czechoslovakia, right? His dad.
Pretty successful father and uncle.
Yeah, not bad. So I mean, there's something, kind of maybe the 3 of them end up together at some point. I don't know. That's interesting, but just to me, Stastny and Tuck seems like a likely combo for a number of reasons. But I like I said a few moments ago, I think we're likely to hear Stastny to Tuck quite a bit this year. That doesn't mean that you're not going to hear Stastny to Tatar or Stastny to Haula or another combination. But I think that there are so many possibilities right now. And think about, again, I have to bring up where we were at this point last year. You're thinking about Vadim Shipachyov as what he was going to do. And that lasted all of a couple of weeks, right? I mean, he scored 1 goal for the Golden. It just goes to show that as much as we might think we know what's likely to happen, it probably isn't going to happen the way we predicted would.
Yeah, nobody saw Shipachyov being shipped back to Russia, but that's how it ended up happening there. So.
No, and that's why who is going to emerge? Who maybe, whether it's one of those young guys, and again, there might be a transaction, a trade, or something, who knows. But those young guys, it's hard to predict which one is going to step up at a particular time. We knew that Tuck and Theodore were going to be the 2 guys last year. We knew that. But which one of these young guys is going to take a step up from the minor leagues or even junior hockey and make an impact? And it's not always the guy who's 18 turning 19 or 19 turning 20. Sometimes it's a guy who's been in the minors for 4 or 5 years. Look at Yanni Gourde with the Tampa Bay Lightning. He was a career minor leaguer. He comes in, he's one of their top goal scorers last year. So you never know which one of those guys is going to finally get it to click.
All right, Vegas Golden Knights Insider Show. Time flying by here. Remember, it's the last week of only 1 week, 1 day show. So next week we'll have more time. Get Dan and get himself a little bit deeper into everything here. When we come back, we're going to take a quick look and ask Dan what he thinks about the Pacific Division. Have other teams improved themselves? Are the Golden Knights still the team to beat? Who else is going to be there? Still a lot to get to here. Vegas Golden Knights Insider Show, Fox Sports Radio.